Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. This is your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Thank you for turning this passion project into one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. It means so much to us. Your feedback really is incredibly valuable. Today, we get to meet an engineer, entrepreneur, thought leader, and we'll say provocateur, who is one of the most recognizable personalities in the DevOps, monitoring, and observability community. If you listen to our great discussion with Rachel Chalmers from Alchemist a few weeks back, you know all about the awesomeness that is Charity Majors. I first met Charity at Monitorama in Portland in 2017, where she professed a hatred of monitoring, which was an interesting choice of venues. She went on to insult a second large industry by saying dashboards are artifacts of past failures. I developed an immediate nerd crush. I applaud anyone in technology willing to tell the Empress she has no clothes. 2017 was shortly after she and Christine founded Honeycomb. Much has happened since then. Recently, Charity published a 4,000-word treatise on the state of observability, which I got to say reads like the unholy matrimony of countercultural agitating from Ken Kesey mixed with anthropological musings from Walter Isaacson. And yes, I do believe that's the first time in history those two amazing writers have been referenced in the same sentence. I've been looking forward to having Charity on this podcast. I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but stay tuned because I'm sure this conversation will be memorable. If you're not already, go out and follow Charity's rants and insights. Charity is Mipsy Tipsy on Twitter. Without further ado, Charity, welcome to the show. Why don't you get started by sharing a little bit more about your background and how you got into this space?
That is the most amazing introduction I think that I've ever had. And I asked with me now. That sounds amazing. Oh my God.
Every word is true.
That was really entertaining to listen to. So thank you. My background, I am a repeat dropout, homeschooled. I've never completed a single degree program of any kind, including grade school. I dropped out of college a couple of times. I started playing this. I got into college in a piano scholarship. Because I lived in the backwoods of Idaho and we didn't have computers. But I realized pretty quickly that I didn't want to be poor the rest of my life. So I swapped keyboards and computers ever since. At the time, this is I was in my late teens and this was like early 2000s. Anybody who knew how to close an HTML bracket was basically, they were throwing jobs at you. They're like, great, log into a Linux system, come get some money. I wish it was still that way. I think a lot about, I would never be able to get into technology days the way it was in Wild Wild West. So how I got into this space, I've bounced around a lot. I've done a lot of, I think of myself as an operations engineer, that's how I personally identify. I always seem to end up responsible for the databases. I worked at Linden Lab on Second Life for 5 years. That was a really formative experience for me. A couple of jobs that I really hated. And then I landed at Parse, which is a mobile backend as a service for mobile apps. And I loved Parse. I was there for almost 4 years. We got acquired by Facebook. And, I was mostly for database stuff. I kind of helped MongoDB grow up. I did a lot with my SQL community. And so it was a little bit of a left turn to observability. But I guess if there's one thing that motivates me above all else, it's doing what must be done. I wish I was the kind of nerd who would wake up and tinker and go, oh, I want to play with Rust today, or oh, I want to, I work with these apps. I am not. I am the kind of nerd who, faced with a problem, if it's the most important problem, whether I know how to do it or not, I can't work on anything else. So, when I was at Facebook, the biggest problem we had 1 million mobile apps, and every day the site was going down. It was personally humiliating for me as a reliability engineer. Every time it would be something completely different. Couldn't predict which app was going to hit the top 10 in iTunes. You couldn't predict when something, like there was the first big outage we had was for some death metal band from Norway. We couldn't read it in their application. We could just see that it went to PM every day our time. And that's when I just became very disillusioned with the state of the art. Like the New Relic APM, they were great at giving you, there was this pattern over and over where, something new would happen, take down the site, we would spend forever figuring it out, postmorteming it, creating custom dashboards so we could find it exactly the next time that it happened, but it would never happen again. It would be on to the next new thing. And it was so infuriating. And I was really at a loss until we joined Facebook, and one of the tools that they threw at us was called Scuba. And I was pretty cynical by then. I was just like, we have to throw bodies on this fire. There's nothing else to look at it. But Scuba was this, I'm not going to say it was lovely to use. It was pretty actually aggressively hostile to users, but it let you do one thing really well, which was in real time. You could slice and dice on any number of dimensions, even whether or not they were high cardinality or not. And, up until this point, all of our monitoring tools have really been built around low cardinality data, meaning, let's say you have a collection of 100 million users, right? The highest cardinality would be any unique ID, social security number, right? First name, last name, pretty high cardinality too. Something like, hair color, it's not super low, but it's pretty low, right? Eye color, gender, species equals human is the lowest of all because there's only one possible value, right? Well, tools had been built to around, low cardinality stuff. So like, you couldn't even have like a tag that was for your host ID. You couldn't have a tag that was for, let alone like your application ID. If you had hundreds of millions of applications, you were just kind of stuck. And this is because systems used to fail in very predictable ways because we had the application, the database, and maybe like the web tier, and all the complexity would be bound up in the application. So, when something broke in the systems level, you could pretty much eyeball it. You go, oh, we ran out of connections in the database again. Oh, here is down. It was a limited set of ways it could fail, and you could predict most of them. You'd figure the rest out over the next 6 months. And then only a couple of times a year would you be really stumped. It's just like, oh, wow, this is something really weird. Like maybe it's a firmware bug or something just like crazy hard. Well, systems have changed a lot. And now, we've got these far-flung distributed systems. We've got sharding, we've got serverless, we've got, third-party APIs, we've got, containers, we've got, and the only thing knitting it together is your code. Everything is a high cardinality dimension. And so, very different paradigm. You need the ability to slice and ask questions from the outside without being able to predict the ways that your systems are going to fail. So, TLDR, it's probably a little bit more technical depth than we really need, but we started instrumenting our code with Scuba. The amount of time it took us to identify the root cause and solve it dropped like a rock, like from ended hours, days, maybe never, right? It just fixes itself. And we are like, well, did you see that? I didn't see that. Move on to like not even minutes. Seconds. It wasn't even an engineering problem. It was you just slice and dice, break this, break down by that, break down by that. Oh, it's that up, blacklist it until we can figure out what's going on. And this made a huge impression on me, because, our lives got so much better. We were able to make so much more progress with the same number of engineers. Suddenly we weren't just like firefighting all the time. So when I left Facebook, I was planning to go be an engineering manager at something. And then I kind of grew up short and went, oh shit. I don't know how to engineer anymore without these tools that we've built. Like it's like going back to Vim instead of an actual IDE. It's like you start to realize how much of your effectiveness as an engineer is the tool ecosystem around you that you get to sit on top of. And that's when, I was like, we have to build this. And I didn't expect to succeed in any way, shape, or form. I was like, well, I'm leaving Facebook. I've got a quote unquote pedigree for the first time in my life. I'm about female has a pedigree. It's never going to happen again. Right. So some people are offering me money and like, great, we're going to take the money and run. We're going to build it. We're definitely going to fail, but hopefully we'll get far enough that we can open source so I can take it and use it and I'll never have to be an engineer again without it.
So you met your co-founder, Christine, I believe at Parse. You both went to Facebook together. Curious to know from that formative time that you spent at Facebook, what were some of the lessons that you took into the founding of Honeycomb? And then perhaps equally interesting, what were some of the lessons you learned at Facebook that you didn't take into Honeycomb?
Right. No, that's such a good question. It's been long enough, and now that I think I can confess that Christine and I were not enthusiastic supporters of the acquisition. Like we were pretty upset about it, honestly. And I stuck around for 2.5 years. Christine stuck around for 1 year, but we were a little bit enraged, and we did not sign up to be at a big company, and now we're getting bussed down to South Bay every day, and it was kind of miserable. I will say that what I learned at Facebook was nothing about engineering, a lot of stuff about organizations and politics. And I say this in both a good and a bad way. Like there's just a lot of stuff about, because Facebook is an incredibly successful company. They wouldn't have gotten to where they are if they didn't do a lot of things right internally, so just stuff like, here's the default way to structure things. Here's what it means to be a manager versus a director versus, here's how you structure meetings. There's just a lot of stuff there where I feel like, when you have the privilege of working at some place like Google or Facebook or something, it becomes automatic, and you don't realize how much labor and toil went into finding what works by default. I took a lot of lessons about leadership, about hard conversations, about performance reviews, just a lot of the nuts and bolts of running a company. I have no idea how I would have, fared at starting Honeycomb without that knowledge, which all of it I just absorbed without thinking of it, and even being somewhat reluctant. I was a little bit pissed off about it. I didn't want to learn it, but I did, and I can't imagine functioning without it now. A lot of the stuff that I had to unlearn, that's a really good question. I don't think I had to unlearn that much, because in my heart, I was always a startup kid. I was always there a little bit, reluctantly. It's more like I had to unlearn some things about being at startups in order to succeed at Facebook. And I was successful at Facebook. I got promoted. I got bonuses, and by the book, I did quite well, but I was never happy there. And I spent a lot of time kind of raging against the machine, which wasn't healthy for me, and it wasn't healthy, for my team. And emotionally, that's just a lot of work that, in retrospect, here's one example. I think that I spared my team too much. I was too much of an umbrella. For most of the engineers working at Parse, it's like we existed in our own little wonderland where, yes, our bills were paid by, the mothership, but like we did our own thing. We had our own culture. We had our own tech and everything. And when we had performance issues, I fought so hard to make it work. Like there were a couple of times where, there was one person who would take up like 70 to 80% of my emotional bandwidth for the course of a year, and I was just so determined because I see their potential, and because I was these are my people, and and in retrospect, I'm like, I didn't do them any favors. That wasn't actually good for them. It meant that the lessons that they needed to learn, they had to go on much longer, in their life, and it was much harder, and they eventually learned those lessons, but, and it wasn't fair to the rest of my team to be spending it wasn't fair to me. Like whenever you're spending all that emotional energy on one member of your team, and taking it as a member of pride that you've never, I took it as a matter of pride that I'd never lost anyone from my team, that nobody'd ever resigned, that I'd always been able to make it work. And it was kind of a hard lesson for me to realize that that's not actually that's not the job. It's not doing the right thing for you or for them or for the company or anyone. And by allowing us to be isolated from Facebook so much, it was that much more of a jolt and a shock and a surprise when, they shut us down. Ultimately, what happened was, there were so many brilliant engineers who ended up working on work that was just going to be thrown away. And I should have leave. I should have, I think that the responsible thing for them to do would be me to have just been honest with myself about where this was going and have been honest with them. And yes, they would have left. And yes, that would have felt shitty, but it would have been the right thing to do for them.
It makes so much sense. And the reason it was a genuine question is because a few weeks back, a guy named Jeff Meyerson was on the podcast, and Jeff wrote a book called Move Fast: How Facebook Builds Software.
Yeah.
And Jeff was kind of the ultimate outsider. It's like a 200-page rant about React and kind of, Facebook's ability to assert influence over the community of developers. It was very interesting, and I was kind of eager to understand from an insider's perspective what it was like being one of those developers, having all that power and associated responsibility within Facebook.
The Kool-Aid there is strong. It is strong. It is potent. Everyone there genuinely believes that they are doing the right thing. That's what was hard for me to grasp. And even later, even I can guarantee you the people who are still there, they believe that they are doing the right thing with all their heart and soul. And that's a little bit difficult to wrap your head around sometimes, but like you should always approach them with that assumption because they really believe it. And that's a powerful cultural thing to figure out how to assert, but like they've done it, and for better or for worse, it's how they think.
And the diaspora from Facebook is pretty amazing, not just honeycomb.
It is. The diaspora from Facebook is really amazing. And it's funny, like when you get them talking, after some drinks, like it's funny that there's a lot of pride universally. And and then there are some who are still like, they've still got the Kool-Aid floating around the system. And then there are a lot who have, when they've gotten, it's almost like leading a cult, when you've left the cult and suddenly you're surrounded to a much more diverse, range of ideas and ideas about Facebook in particular. And it starts to dawn on you just how, I don't want to say brainwashed, it's a very strong, but the influences are so profound. These are the people that you ride the bus with every day, you eat with every day, you're there late with every day. Like you eat, sleep, breathe Facebook. And, they have very sophisticated arguments for why they're right and doing God's work and all these things. And it's really hard to exit that. And when you do exit it, there's a bit of a reckoning that kind of takes place within a lot of people, just like, what was I doing? And was it good or not? And, it's really fascinating. It's really hard to get them on the record though, because there's a lot of tribal loyalty.
Now, you may not appreciate the fact that you forget more in an afternoon about observability than almost the entire global population will ever know. So I'm going to toss you a softball, which I think is beneficial. I would love to hear it in your own words. What is observability and how is it different from monitoring?
Well, I'd like to talk about it in like, observability isn't a new thing. It's been around since the 60s, but it comes from mechanical engineering and control systems theory. And the definitions there, it's very mathematical, right? Observability is the mathematical dual of controllability. And the extent to which you can ask questions from the outside and reason about what's happening on the inside is the extent to which, you have observability. And that's really that was Googling that, like shortly after we started Honeycomb, it was when light bulbs kind of went off in my mind. Oh my God, we're trying to do this in software. And it's very divergent from monitoring. Monitoring is much more of a post hoc, oh, that thing broke. Cool, let's add a check so that if it breaks again, we can find it, right? Observability is much more about deep instrumentation to allow you to reason about the inner workings of the system, no matter what state it's gotten into. And the pithy version is that monitoring is about known unknowns. Observability is about the unknown unknowns. It's about the scenarios that you could never predict it happening, the ones you didn't see coming, the ones that you don't have graphs and dashboards sitting there going like, oh, there's the thing, right? And it's the ability to, there's a lot of technical prerequisites and things that go into fulfilling this promise. Like you have to have different data types, you have to have a different query model, but fundamentally it's just about allowing engineers to peek under the hood of their code and see what's really going on without having to, do the dance where you go and add some instrumentation around the thing that you're suspecting is the problem, and then you redeploy, or you poke at that and then you redeploy. Those are all ways of like trying to. Those are ways of finding known unknowns and then trying again. But really just legitimately about, can you understand anything that's happening from the outside without shipping custom code to handle it?
So you gave that great example earlier about leaving Facebook and wanting to go do software engineering and being like, wait, this feels like, going from, an SDE back to Vim, right? That's a very colorful example. So you start Honeycomb, you have these kind of, thoughts on the philosophy of observability. How did you map the two? What is it that Honeycomb does that makes observability easier to operationalize?
Right. Well, I don't know how much stomach you have for, like, we had to start by writing our own storage engine because, imagine if you need to be able to ask any question in a fast, performant way without predicting what questions you need to ask, well, then you can't rely on anything with schemas. You can't rely on anything with indexes. You can't rely on any, and you need to pack as much density, the density of information around the request as possible, so that, a mature instrumented system in Honeycomb usually has like 300 to 500 dimensions per request. So that's like 500 details that describe this one request, and one request per service, right? So as your request is popping through your system, at each hop, it's got like 500 details. And what that allows you to do is do things like, oh, there's a spike in errors. What are they? By that, what you mean is, what do all those errors have in common that is different from non-errors, right? And traditionally with metrics monitoring, you can't actually ask that question, because a metric is just a number with a few tags appended to describe it. It doesn't have those 500 details that are all like these are all describing the same event. You can't actually say, given those errors, like what to have in common. You discarded all that information when you wrote it out to disk, so you can never get it back again, right? It's an interesting, you can derive metrics from these arbitrarily wide structured data events, but you can't ever get the event back once you've broken it up into metrics. So with these wide events, you can correlate. You can go, oh, those errors they're only the requests that are from this version of iOS, using this SDK for this particular application, for these particular users, or this shard, or this environment, or whatever. And like, once you know that, it's so much harder to find where in the system the bug is and what's different about it than it is to actually fix the code, right? So in order to achieve observability, you both need a storage engine that is basically, you have to have a columnar store. We wrote a really long blog post with all the boring technical details about why this is true. You have to have a columnar store. You have to have flexible schemas. You have to have an interface that relies on querying. Because instead of, like, I think of dashboards as being like, each dashboard is an answer. It's a state, it answers a question that you asked at one point. When people do debugging today, what they usually mean is they take a bunch of dashboards and they just flip through them, looking for ones that have the same shape as the one that they think is the problem, right? Which is just like, looking at this answer. Is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? Nope. That's not debugging, right? Debugging is following a trail of breadcrumbs. It's asking a question, looking at the answer, and based on the answer, asking another question, right? So that's what you can do when you have these wide events and all this context is correlated together. You can do like, you can go look at the spike in errors and say, are they to all endpoints? Break down by endpoints. Nope, it's just to the read endpoints. Was it to all the read endpoints? Nope, it's just to like payments and exports. Is it to all of the backends behind these? Oh, nope, it's just to the ones that are talking to Cassandra and the analytics side. Was it to all of them? Nope, it's just to this shard. Was it to all of them? Nope, it's just to these app IDs. You can, it doesn't matter what the answer is, because you can always find your way to it because you can ask these iterative questions.
So in this space, we think about our mission as making it easier to create more high quality software faster, that's always available and performs as expected. So given that that's kind of a visionary statement about why we do what we do, I'd be curious to know from you, when you talk to your user community, do you feel like they shoulder that responsibility for kind of helping the world like interact with better software faster, or is it more?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We became engineers because we're curious, because we like to fix things, because we like to make things better. And, if you find an engineer who doesn't resonate with this vision, it's probably an engineer who's been burnt out. It's probably an engineer who's had their hands slapped too many times, who's been fried, who's been abused, who's been expected to shoulder a burden where they're waking up every night. Like that's not the vision, right? The vision is not to ops has a well-deserved reputation for masochism, and the vision is not to invite developers to also be masochistic. The idea is that those are systems that are not well understood. They were never well understood. And every day we ship more code that we don't really understand onto these systems we've never understood, and somebody's got to fight the fires, right? It doesn't actually have to be that way. Systems can be well understood. This is why I like to think of like observability-driven development. TDD, like test-driven development, the most powerful software development of my lifetime, right? but it stops at the edge of your laptop. It doesn't include anything about the real world. If all your tests run, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that it's probably logically correct. It doesn't tell you anything about how it's going to work in production. Like, I think that we need to expand that loop to be so that you're writing code, you're instrumenting as you're writing it, with an eye towards future you, who in 15 minutes or so is going to see it in production, and then can look at it through the lens of that instrumentation and ask themselves, is it doing what I expected it to do? Does anything else look weird? Right? And closing that loop, if you close that loop within a few minutes, while it's all still fresh in your head, you know exactly what you're building, you know why you wanted to build it, you know what trade-offs you tried, you know what didn't work, you know what your instrumentation says, you'll find like well upwards of 80% of all bugs, like right there before users can even notice it. And that makes engineering so much more fun. It makes it, you can move so much faster. And, I've done a lot of back of the envelope math about this. If it takes you 15 minutes to get your code out to production, say you need X number of software engineers to build and maintain that. Well, if it takes, hours, you need at least twice as many. If it takes days, you need at least twice as many again. If it takes weeks, you need at least twice as many again. Like, that's a lot of wasted cycles. And it's a lot of wasted, tedious cycles and boring cycles, just waiting on each other. And, like, if you ever seen a company and go, oh, that's a cool product, whatever, it's kind of small, whatever, interesting. And you find out they have 800 software engineers and you're just like, what are they even doing? I guarantee they don't have a good build pipeline. I don't remember, should developers be held accountable? Yes, absolutely. And when you do this in a healthy way, they embrace it. Nobody wants to do a bad job. Everybody wants to see the impact of their work on their users, right? And in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the very beginning, right? This is how we wrote code. We had our SSH session. We were editing in Vim or Emacs on production. Then you hit save, and then you looked at it and you saw, did it work or not, right? And there was this really virtuous cycle there. And we've gotten all professional now. We've got like teams that do this and that, and we've disconnected that virtuous feedback loop, and it makes it very tedious and it doesn't result in better software.
So thankfully, we're no longer in the beginning, and
Right.
I'd argue the need for instrumentation frameworks like Honeycomb is more important than ever. Not debate the witness, but I would love to hear your version of the answer of why the current framework for like modern apps and user expectations around modern apps makes the old way managing observability no longer feasible.
Well, managing observability in particular, it's just, like we used to have the LAMP stack. There was, if all else failed, you could attach GDB and step through your code. Well, you can't do that now. We've blown up the LAMP stack, and it's hop. It's all over the place. We've got God knows how many storage systems and God knows how many APIs, and it doesn't work that way anymore. And that's why I think it's no longer feasible to have, like we said for a long time that, we got to break down silos, devs and ops need to speak to each other and everything. I actually think it's, if you have a modern system using microservices and all this stuff, it's actually no longer feasible for software engineers to not own their own code, right? No one else has any prayer of like backtracing, trying to figure out what the hell you were intending to do or figuring out where the system is. You can't just lob that over the wall and expect anybody to like treat it like a black box. It's not a black box anymore. The box has exploded. Its guts are out there, and you got to think of yourself more like, an open heart surgeon. You need to fix it yourself. You can't delegate that. It's your job.
So in Silicon Valley, we do a lot of navel gazing, and this statement is not controversial, but I think we both know, sadly, that it is outside of Silicon Valley, and that is that diverse teams of developers write better software. What would you say to the community outside of our 20-mile square radius that disagrees with that statement?
Well, I think first you need to acknowledge that it's not always technically true. Like if you're writing a product for end users, right? Then yes, you really do need a diverse team because you don't want to name yourself something embarrassing that all women would be like, oh my God, so that's a pretty easy one. But then like I think sometimes people will rightly challenge you and go, but like for a database, like who cares? It's not facing users, like who cares if there's a diverse team? And that's where I think that we need to emphasize the fact that it's not first about the product, it's about the team. teams are healthier when they are diverse, when they're not monocultures. For one thing, you can't sustain a monoculture forever, right? You just can't. If you want to grow, if you want to be successful in the world, and the longer you wait to diversify your teams, the more painful and difficult it will be. So you should just start out by having them diverse from the beginning. Diverse teams work better because, like, they've done there's a lot of scientific research now that shows that, like, teams that have, a balance of women and men are more successful than, ones that aren't. Like, there's a lot of research that says that. And I think that where I would emphasize is that any product or any system has like two constituents. You've got your users and you've got your engineers, right? And they're both equal. They both need to be taken care of. They both need to be happy, because I've never seen a situation where one of them was deeply unhappy and the other was thriving long term, right? It just doesn't happen. They rise or they fall in tandem. And monoculture teams are very fragile. They're very fragile. They're very wispy. They tend to be insular. They're just they're not healthy in the short term or the long term. And that's really what it's about, right? Yes, we care about the software that we ship and we want it to be good, but we also want to show up every day and go to work with people that we care about, people that we feel psychologically safe around, people who we know aren't going to look at us funny or talk about us behind our back or say things about us that, like, we stick out. We want to be able to know that we're going to get the jokes, or that there's going to be tolerance for our own uniqueness, and it's just, that's a better way to live, right? So even if you're not convinced by, the arguments about, the end product or whatever, I can kind of get that sometime. But, and also there's like, who was it? It wasn't Rousseau. It was one of those famous French philosophers, though. The law of government that says that you should only ever design a system that you would be happy to exist in at any point in that system. You know who I'm talking about? It's like, if you're you want to design a company where you'd be okay being the CEO, but you'd be okay being the person who delivers the mail, right? You want to design a system where you'd be okay being a manager, you'd be okay being an IC, and you also have to extend that a little to, like, if you were a woman, right? Like, you got to design a system where you would feel okay being in any of these spots. If you were any of the people, right? You don't want to design. I mean, I guess you could take that rule to be like, well, I'm a white dude, so I feel happy at any of these spots. But, like, that's very that's not the right way of thinking about it. It's you want to design a system and enforce it so that you would be happy to play your part from any of the places, right? It doesn't take a lot of empathy just to see that companies' jobs, we spend more time with each other than we do with our own families. And I don't think that this is just that culture is something that just the CEO, the C-suite, and the VPs, and this is something that every single one of us, we co-create it every day. We show up to work, we co-create this company every day. And if we didn't show up, it wouldn't be there. So every single one of us has a responsibility to act like an owner of it, and to, to be mindful of the company that we create.
We talk a lot on the show about jobs or tasks that are good candidates for AI-driven automation. And we haven't spent much time talking about the software development lifecycle, including monitoring, observability, DevOps, et cetera, and where there might be opportunities to introduce automation to potentially eliminate tasks that are prone to human error. What are your thoughts on what could the future look like of AI inserted into the software lifecycle?
That's such an interesting question. I, as you may know, I'm a little bit snarky about AI. As it exists, like, it's clear to me that there is a future for AI and ops, but every time I see the hashtag AI ops these days, it tends to be something that I just raise an eyebrow at. Like, oh, you have 45,000 status emails a day, so you need AI ops to trawl through them. Why don't you just turn them all off? Like, this is a problem that doesn't need to exist. That said, I do believe that, we should want computers to do what computers do best, which is crunching numbers and, providing data. And we want humans to do what humans do best, which in my mind is attaching meaning to things. and interpreting things. You could see a spike on a graph, and a computer can tell you that spike exists, but only a person can tell you whether it's good or bad, or intentional or not, or a good sign or a scary one. So, I think that in the near term, all of our competitors keep going AI this and AI that, and we look at it and it's like, oh, okay, I guess what we're doing counts as AI too. But it's like, it's so underwhelming to look at it that way. It's such a buzzword that I think that the places that AI ops is really meaningful these days is at places like Google that are just too large, and at that scale you're fine with a certain amount of just lossage, of just like failure. Because you build your systems to be resilient to a lot of failure. And that's something that I think that most companies these days they're still there. They're still like at the stage of trying to build the resilience to failure and like chaos engineering and like AI stuff. I mostly feel like most companies should be over that hump before they start getting fancy.
Well, and at Honeycomb, you're squarely augmenting human intelligence. These are not new tasks.
Absolutely.
You help the humans do the tasks better.
Yes, we're different from a lot of our competitors here in that we see ourselves as absolutely, the human is in the driver's seat, and we are just trying to, we're trying to surface the useful stuff in a useful way. The human visual scanning is so fucking powerful. Versus a lot of our competitors are out there telling CTOs and CIOs, just give us lots of money and you don't even have to know how your systems work. Don't worry about it. Give us tens of millions of dollars and we'll just tell you what to look at the time that you should look at it. And I just think that that's a lie. That's a dirty lie. And I get why that would be a comforting lie, because, and this blew my mind when I learned it, but to most C-levels, people come and go and vendors are forever. So their relationship with their vendors is actually a much stronger one than with their own top engineers. And that just really rubs me the wrong way. And I don't believe it's the right future to be building for, and I don't believe it's the right future to be investing in. I think that, at the end of the day, somebody has to understand what's happening. And that's going to be true if we have AI, just like it's true if we don't have AI. It's at the end, and computers can do a lot of number crunching and analysis in order to serve up stuff for a human, like bubble up. One of our favorite features, like people's favorite features at Honeycomb, is called bubble up. And what that is look at any heat map, and if there's something you're like, what is this? This looks off. You draw a little circle around, a little bubble, right? And we pre-compute for all of the requests inside the bubble, all dimensions outside the bubble, and then we sort and we diff them. So you can see exactly how the stuff inside the bubble is different from the stuff outside the bubble. And that's so powerful, right? And that takes a lot of number crunching, but we're not trying to tell them to look at this. We're receiving the command to look at that, and then we serve up, the information. I think this way a lot about instrumentation too. I think there's a real desire out there, a hunger that has been fed by so many vendors throughout the year to just give you magical instrumentation that you don't ever have to think about. You just install a gem or a Go binary or whatever, and it'll just show me what I want to know. And that is only ever going to give you the basics. It's never going to give you the stuff that is custom to you, that is precious about your environment, that is different, that is novel. And the thing is that we as vendors, we can do a lot to make that easy. We can build helpers, we can build wrappers, we can make it as easy as doing a print off. But I can't tell you what matters about your code. I will never be able to tell you what matters about your code. All I can do is make it easier for you to tell me what matters about your code.
Charity, it seems like we just got started, but I got to get you off the hot seat, but not without answering one last question. This is an important one. So you got a lot of kids and girls and underrepresented minorities thinking about their careers in tech and aspiring to be charity. And maybe, they're from the equivalent of Idaho, and the equivalent of didn't grow up with a keyboard, or,
Right.
grew up playing music, and they look to you as a role model. And so I really want to get your perspective on what can you tell them to encourage them that there isn't maybe the glass ceiling that they thought there was.
I do have advice. It's somewhat problematic advice. I think that when you're junior, when you're just starting out, just put your head down. Don't pick every battle. Don't sign up for all the diversity and inclusion work. Just learn as much as you can, and try to have a tough skin. Try to let stuff roll off you. Try to not be too sensitive, and learn as much as you can, and until you become senior. And then I think we have a responsibility to learn to be sensitive and to really, it's all about gaining status, gaining a skill set so that you're super valuable, so that you can turn around and use that power on behalf of others. There's a lot of research that shows that, women and, queers and and people of color get punished for advocating for themselves, but they don't get punished for advocating for others. So I think that's a responsibility that we all have, is to advocate for each other, so that we don't have to take on the burden of, advocating for ourselves. It's always a little bit touchy when you tell people to get a thick skin and try and let it roll off your back. But I guess I'm a pragmatist. I wish the world wasn't the way it is, but I want to help you survive it the way it is. And the way to survive it is to get through the hard part, become a person with skills of value, and then you can really throw your weight around. You can fuck shit up for the better.
Are you a good steward of that advice? Have you lived by it?
Absolutely. I grew up fundamentalist, and I actually went to the computer lab because there were no women there, and I didn't want to be home raising babies and then barefoot in the kitchen and stuff. So I've had to. My sensitivity is learned. My sensitivity is learned. It was when I started, being someone that people came to for advice, and then I realized that, I have a responsibility to make it easier for people. I don't like talking about diversity stuff a lot. I'm not comfortable. I'm not an expert in it. I'm not comfortable, being super outspoken about it, but I do try to live my values. If you go look at the Honeycomb team page, I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the team that we've built. It takes all types. I don't think that you can ask anyone to do everything. I'm not super comfortable talking about it, but I do when I need to, and I do try to live my values.
You said something at the beginning of the discussion that spoke volumes, which is when you were leading a team at Facebook, I think you said like 90% of your energy over the course of a year was consumed by keeping one team member. And the fact that, that to me is the best example of living your values, that you really, took great pains to make sure you retained your team and took care of them. And that's not a statement on DEI per se, but that's just on, on growing people.
Yeah. There's systemic change that, we all like flail our fists against the system and everything. And then there's change that each of us can just quietly do. Just find someone who's struggling and offer to mentor them. Just find someone who needs a buddy or an ear, and that's honestly, I have a lot more. I've seen better results from that kind of change. I've seen lives really change. Versus like all the millions of dollars that these big companies are spending on DEI, and it just seems to be flush. It seems to be creating a great market for highly paid diversity consultants, and that's about all I can say. People on a personal basis, you can absolutely change lives.
Charity, we're out of time, but I referenced your Twitter handle, Mipsy Tipsy, and I will put a link in the show notes to your, what I was calling a treatise on modern observability. But anything else you want to share with our guests about how to follow your work?
Charity.wtf is my personal blog. So
good. There you have it. That will also go in the show notes.
Awesome.
Charity, this has been so much fun. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Good to reconnect. Well, this is your host, Dan Turchin, AI in the Future of Work, signing off for this week, but we're back next week with another fascinating guest.